Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I am your host, Omar Khalid. Today is Friday, the 24th of November 2023, and we, as usual, have got lots to discuss with you with interesting guests. Our first topic, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be the conflict in Palestine. Day 49, the truce actually has come into effect from today. This is going to be a 4-day truce between Hamas and Israel, in which there are certain guarantees that have been given, especially from the Israeli side, for these 4 days. What's going to happen in these 4 days? Will there be an extension of this 4-day truce? Will there be some kind of light at the end of the tunnel in the form of a long-term ceasefire, or maybe a two-state solution and its implementation? Although there is a lot of critique as far as whether that will actually happen, but there are a lot of positive sentiments that are also emanating from within Palestine and across the world. The world and the Muslim countries are also trying to work around the clock behind the scenes also to try to grapple at the opportunity and look for a permanent solution to this current crisis. So are some of the Western countries. We hope that the fruits of their labor will be shown in the coming days. But for the moment, there is truce and an exchange of prisoners. That is going to happen as well. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the economic recovery as far as Pakistan is concerned, and also the membership for BRICS, for which Pakistan has formally requested, which is, of course, we all know, an important organization which consists of developing countries. This said, when you look at the economic recovery as far as Pakistan is concerned, whether it be in the form of the KSE 100 index that has crossed 59,000 as the bulls maintain the grip, and this gaining spree that we've been seeing on a continuous level since the last few days, it shows a lot of positive sentiment. But there is a lot of background work also that has been going on by the caretaker government, as pointed out by Shamshad Akhtar, the Minister for Finance, in one of the leading media interviews recently, in which she highlighted the different macroeconomic indicators that the caretaker government has been working on, as well as the deal with the IMF and what needs to be done by the government and what the government is doing. We'll be highlighting that and more in our second story. Then we'll be talking about the outbreak of respiratory disease or pneumonia in China. The WHO is asking China to provide information on this unexplained outbreak of respiratory illnesses and pneumonia, particularly in children. Now, hospitals in multiple cities are reportedly overwhelmed. We all remember how COVID also began, and of course we also know that the respiratory illnesses and pneumonia have symptoms that are common with COVID-19. Lastly, we'll be talking about the 8th martyrdom anniversary of Maryam Mukhtar, first female fighter pilot of Pakistan. And of course, she left us for a higher abode 8 years ago on this very day. She was born on the 18th of May 1992 in Karachi and joined Pakistan Air Force in 2011. We are going to pay homage to her, of course, in our last story. Now, it's day 49 of the conflict, the war, the genocide that Israel has perpetrated on Palestine, on Gaza. Today, there is some kind of a light that at the end of the tunnel that has shown its signs in the form of a truce between Hamas and Israel. There is also an exchange of prisoners that is going to happen later in the day, and this is going to happen in certain stages. The deal is struck between both the sides to have a certain number of exchange of prisoners, wherein Hamas also says that it might agree to an increase in the number of prisoners from its side that will be exchanged with Israel. This said, there is also a lot of commotion in other parts of Palestine. The bombardment has been continuing, the casualties have been increasing, and the lack of humanitarian aid is also a huge cause of concern for the people in Gaza and in Palestine. To highlight that much more, the efforts that have been going on behind the scenes, we've been joined by Dr. Salma Malik. She's a leading foreign affairs expert, and she's here with us in the studios. Dr. Salma, thank you very much to have joined us. Let's begin with this truce. Did you think that a 4-day truce would actually happen at some time of this barbaric genocide-like conflict that has been going on since the 7th of October? And if so, what are your expectations from these 4 days?
A truce sooner or later was called for. Expectations aside, in a sense that there had to be a point where they would take a break, or they would go back on the table, depending on who is pushing the case. And in this case, having Qatar doing the mediation and bringing these two parties together is not something unthinkable, because Qatar has a history of doing these things, plus the fact that Qatar carries a lot of clout between the Hamas as well as the Israeli intelligence agencies and the Israeli establishment. But the fact that it has happened, and hopefully these 4 days end up becoming a precursor for a longer ceasefire, or for going back to the tables and then just calling it a ceasefire for this time, and then going for an international conference and settling of the problem, is something that one looks forward to. But then there is also a fear, Omar, that this 4-day truce might get reduced to 2 days even, or 2.5 days. And the fact that just a day before the truce was declared, there was exceptional bombing from the Israeli side.
And the Israeli soldiers were felicitating themselves on the fact that they had bombarded the Palestinians.
Exactly, plus the fact that they have even targeted and hit a UN-run school is something which is actually a shameful act. But they have done what they wanted to do. They have razed to rubble northern Gaza. And how many people are successful in reaching their old places? Would they be evicted? There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of confusion, people are scared as to what if it does not work. So it's going to be a mixed picture, and it's too early to celebrate whether these 4 days would be a precursor for something better than what we are expecting.
Well, one needs to be cautiously optimistic, if not completely optimistic.
Absolutely, I agree.
This said, Israel says northern Gaza is out of bounds. A lot of Palestinians have tried to enter northern Gaza, and they have not been allowed by Israel. So what's the game plan by Israel post the truce?
This is actually funny, because this is one way, and they have done this at a smaller scale throughout these decades, that they push people out, they bomb, they make the neighborhoods insecure, and then those people become displaced, or they become refugees, aliens in other land, and that's how they have piece by piece taken away the entire Palestine through these long 70+ decades. And they have done the same this time, but with a huge bang. And people returning to their own old homelands in northern Gaza, some people are trying, but it won't be possible. But the fact that at least people are thinking that whatever is available, we should make the most of it. At least we're going back to our homelands, and at least there's going to be somewhat of a semblance of peace. But again, I go back to my earlier point that how long that semblance of peace would be is anyone's guess. But one can only hope that Qatar, putting its weight behind this tremendous effort, prevails on the two parties to extend this truce, and also has the Saudis as well as the Americans and other parties pushing the case for them, because every country, minus the Muslim world, I would say, specifically the Western capitals, the US as well as UK, is getting enormous negative press because of what has happened in Gaza, and because of the statements issued by the statespersons and the leadership in the earlier days or weeks. So now it's kind of a make-up effort and to look good and make their constituencies a little better and happier with what is happening.
So let's talk about the political connotations of it all, whether it be in Israel, where Netanyahu's popularity was dimming, and since this has happened, this incident has begun on the 7th of October, his popularity has increased.
Yes.
Has he used this conflict, this genocide, as leverage for his political popularity? B, in the United States, we have elections coming next year, and that is why Joe Biden is, crumbling a little bit under the pressure of his voters, and has changed his narrative since the 7th of October. This said, will that narrative further change under pressure? Will the narrative in countries such as the United Kingdom also change under the pressure? Do you feel that the people power is important for the West?
Oh yes, it is very important for the West. But you see, also the fact that the people's power is also manipulated in certain senses. The initial way, initially the way newspapers, not exactly tabloids, very important newspapers and media houses went around doing the narrative building, and they were trying to portray that so much damage was being done to the Israelis, trying to take away the attention and the heat from what was happening to the Palestinians was commendable. It was something really shameful, but it was also a commendable media exercise as to how you entirely change the truth. But I was just having a conversation with one of my friends based in the UK, and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people are going out in the streets and marching in favor of the Palestinians. And they said that initially, I mean, we're also scared that one can make us victims of hate crime. But the very fact is that initially they would even close toilet facilities anywhere in those city squares so that people remain uncomfortable. But now they are kind of crumbling under the pressure, that there's too much of pressure. So allow these people to vent out their feelings, but UK is different from the US. The US is entering the election year, and the very fact that US has also allowed Qatar to take a lead is that it does what is required and does not even feel the repercussions of it. And they would say, oh, it's a Qatari-led process, and we are bound by our friends and near allies and all, although Qatar wasn't really in the US favor for the longest. But the Doha process and now this is being used as a leverage to make everyone happy and yet not ruffle feathers for the Jewish lobby in the US and otherwise.
Now, speaking of the Jewish lobby in the US and otherwise, we've seen a lot of repercussions for those who have been speaking for the Palestinians and the human rights values that have been completely dismissed by Israel. A lot of actresses, very renowned actresses, have been shuffled off the list. They have been taken off certain groups. Their agents are no longer representing them. This said, there is also, you talked about the pressure of the people, but do you feel this has not also given rise to an increase in polarization in the West, a West that was already polarized because of a deliberate incursion of Islamophobia? But do you feel incidents such as this genocide-like situation in Palestine are also going to increase that polarization between people? We see a lot of incidents of people showing their hatred outright towards people who they feel have an Arab descent.
Yeah, because that's how the media manipulation is being done, depending on which circuit they're watching these things. And you also need to remember that USA over the years has also become a very polarized and ultra-nationalist kind of a culture, which we never really associated. The Trump phenomenon has actually brought out the fact that there are two USAs, or the two white people in USA, one which are totally into their nationalistic fervor and hatred for everyone else, and the other which are very accommodating, part of that melting pot, the old school. But the fact is that depending as to what the media channels are portraying to these people would be there. Many of the media channels are actually run by Israeli interest groups. The opinion polls are being manipulated by them. They are capitalized by them. So it is actually the extent of how strong the Israeli or the Jewish lobby is entrenched in the US circuit that at times it is very difficult to figure out as to who's running whom. Are the Americans influencing the Israelis, or the Israelis are influencing the Americans? Because it's a very, very difficult situation. All the media houses, the print, the books, the publishing houses, opinion polls, lobbyists in the legislations. So all of them are actually totally encaptured by the Israeli lobby or the Jewish lobby. And here one needs to make a distinction, because the Israeli lobby and the Jewish lobby are technically two different things. But at the end of the day, there is a convergence of interest, and that convergence of interest then goes in the favor of what the likes of Netanyahu are doing. So yes, that becomes a difficult situation.
Dr. Salma, more than 14,800 people have been martyred since the 7th of October, since the last 49 days more or less. What is the role of the judicial or human rights organizations? A lot of statements have emanated, but will those statements ever translate into proper action against Israel?
No, never. I mean, the human rights organizations are also initially when the UN was trying to do some work there, the UN officers were targeted, the UN personnel were targeted. So they are also very fearful of what would happen to them. And they remain very cautious and guarded. Now that the corridor for humanity has been opened, they are moving in, but how much? After the type of damage that has happened in these 49 long days, there's so much to go through and so much to do. And the Netanyahu's brigade is so shameless that they have no qualms in even targeting school children.
Can you imagine, even in this so-called 4-day truce, there were 3 members of his so-called war cabinet that opposed the idea?
Absolutely, but the point that you earlier alluded to, that it's elections for him, and that is all that matters. Plus the fact that he is delivering a greater Israel on a platter with silver lining to the people. So at the end of the day, today those who are opposing what he's doing on humanity basis, or the fact that they feel that this is something truly cruel and bad, tomorrow those would be outvoted and people would say, now we have a bigger house to manage, and Israel is shaping up. So it's the short-term gains or short-term interest versus the long-term interest, and people are actually looking at the long-term interest. Plus the fact, we also need to see how this type of war ethos makes people have a very different perspective on the way they want to lead life, or the way they dehumanize the other. And here this is a very strong attempt of dehumanizing the other, and the other here unfortunately are the Palestinians, and they have been on the receiving end, and there's very little constituency of empathy for them, which is very tragic.
What I really fear is that with time this will become the new norm, and that people will no longer raise their eyebrows whenever such an incident happens in the future. Let's talk about the humanitarian angle of it all. We all know the state in which the hospitals are present, because they have either been bombarded or been attacked in one way or the other by the Israeli forces. The director of the Al-Shifa hospital has been arrested. A spokesperson says the United Nations Health Agency is working on more evacuations from northern Gaza hospitals as the truce progresses, so that those who are really sick in need of health or aid can be given that aid in other parts of the country or across the border. Palestinian Red Crescent also says 2 ambulances, 85 aid trucks have entered from the Rafah crossing. Will we see more aid entering? And if so, if this passes the 4-day truce, will Israel then not allow that aid to enter Israel or Palestine?
While we speak, all those who have been part of the mediation led by Qatar are constantly trying to negotiate more space, more time with the stakeholders. So hopefully, on a very optimistic note, this truce might spread out. But at the same time, if there are any spoilers other than those who are visible and they want to create any problem, they would do that. And my fear is that eventually, of course, they would name the Hamas or the Hezbollah being the spoilers, or some new actor being the spoilers, and cut short the duration of the truce. And that would be an absolute killer. And I think that would also create a lot of hue and cry. So hopefully, fingers crossed, these 4 days would continue, and it might actually go beyond that. And I also feel that this is an opportunity that Israel also wanted, having done bit of what it really wanted, the homework, that it needs to simmer down, it needs to backtrack from what it has done.
But the fact is, Dr. Salma, it might simmer down, but will people forget? Will the families of all those who've perished, will they ever forget?
No one will ever forget that. But you see, at the peak of Israeli apartheid, when the late Yasser Arafat was alive, when the Palestinians had no recourse, the images that we saw growing up were young boys holding big stones in their hand and saying that, okay, agreed, if you don't allow us to use weapons, then we will do the intifada. So the intifada generation is now the parents' generation, and they will give rise to a generation which will be the next level of intifada, and they will fight for their homeland as much as they can. But also you need to see that Israel is specifically targeting young children and women, because they really want to indulge into an ethnic cleansing. They really want to indulge into what
they want to eliminate a generation.
Exactly, eliminate the generation, eliminate the Palestinians altogether, so that the trouble is not there for them. So, and I always end up saying that there are so many commonalities between the Palestinians and how India is treating Kashmir, the Palestinization of Kashmir.
I think they are following the example, the exact role model of Israel.
This is a very textbook work as to how what Netanyahu is doing, and Pakistan needs to already start watching this because this is what India might end up doing in occupied Jammu and Kashmir in the years to come.
Before we come to Pakistan and its role as far as this Palestinian conflict, whether it be sending the aids or what our foreign Minister Jalil Abbas Jilani Sahab has said that Pakistan is ready to airlift injured Palestinians for their treatment in their country. I think it's a very good gesture from Pakistan's side. I'd like to understand, you talk of intifada. All the Israeli side is being weaponized by many important countries in the West. A lot of question marks are being raised in different circles, and I was reading some of those, whether the Palestinians should also be weaponized by certain factors or certain countries or certain organizations. Is that a possibility as well?
Possibility, definitely, but who is going to weaponize them? That's also a question, because most of the weapon industry, and actually this is a very important point that you have raised. We look at any conflict from a humanitarian angle at best, and at worst from how the politics and the economics and the military aspects are happening. What we don't actually look at a conflict in a very cold-blooded calculation is that many conflicts also provide the weapons industry to check out how lethal their new killing machines are. And that is precisely what the US and Israel is doing there. And most of the weapons market, the weapons supermarket, is owned or run by the Israeli groups or the American groups. So would they actually allow any of their allies who are friends with Palestine to get the weapons or transfer the weapons that they have in their kitty to the Palestinians? No, it would not happen. They would embargo. This is what they did with the Northern Alliance. Equip them, don't equip the others. So they have these selective embargoes, which are at best extremely dangerous and extremely bad for any conflict to happen. There should be a blanket de-weaponization or blanket ban on weaponization.
But that will never happen.
This would happen. So no, it would not.
Final question, I'd like a short answer. I'd like to understand Pakistan's role in all of it. We've sent 2 huge consignments, and I hope they've reached now that they have opened the Rafah border. Our spokesperson, our Foreign Office spokesman, says Pakistan supports the call for an international peace conference on Palestinian question, and also our Foreign Minister who says that Pakistan is ready to airlift the injured Palestinians for treatment in the country. Will those requests be accepted from the other side?
There is no harm in the acceptance of those 2 requests, and one also should see how Pakistan is sincere in what it has offered. Pakistanis are extremely, genuinely emotional about their Palestinian brothers, more so than anything, and we have made it a part and parcel of Pakistan's rationale that we have always stood by the Palestinians. So if that happens, that would be a welcome thought, and I think it's a very reasonable demand that there should be an international conference to sit down, dialogue, negotiate and settle the problem rather than otherwise. Israel has managed to get the northern Gaza for itself. Now the next episode should wait for a little while, and then they can start doing what they want to do.
They are doing in the West Bank as well.
They're doing what they're doing in the West Bank.
231 people have died to date in the West Bank. So it's not as if they have stopped their activities within Palestine.
So they're doing it piecemeal, and they'll continue doing this. But I think this is a time when the Israelis have also realized that they would lose the type of immunity and the empathy that they're getting or the support they're getting from their principal allies if they up the ante any further. And let's
continue to be optimistic, and let's see the glass as half full and not half empty, and let's hope that there's some kind of a reflection during these 4 days by the Israeli side on what they have done and what they should not continue doing after the truce ends. Thank you so very much, Dr. Salma Malik,
so much
for joined us. That was Dr. Salma Malik, ladies and gentlemen, talking to us about the day 49 of the conflict, the war, the genocide between Israel and Hamas, Israel and Palestine. As I said, 14,800 plus people have perished, have been martyred. There is a 4-day truce that has come into effect. What happens now is something that everybody is going to watch patiently. More after this short break. Welcome back, and our second story is more optimistic than our first, and this talks about Pakistan's economic recovery, whether it be the KSE 100 index that has crossed the 59,000 mark, which we wouldn't have thought maybe a couple of months back could ever happen in Pakistan, but it is happening. Whether it be the different economic reforms that the current caretaker government is undergoing, whether it be the formal request for membership of BRICS that Pakistan has now applied for, a lot of important steps are being taken by this current government, and it hopes that these will reap the necessary fruits within the coming weeks and months and years, and of course the continuity of the policies by the next government post elections will be also extremely important. We'll be joined by Dr. Usman Chohan. He is a political economist and he is with us in the studios. Usman, thank you very much to have joined us. Usman, let's begin first of all with the KSE 100 index crossing 59,000. Did you ever imagine one day, maybe a year back, that we would be crossing 59,000?
Yes, I could imagine it, but that's because, like you, I'm an imaginative person.
All right.
And I'm also an optimist like you. And it's a long time coming, in my honest opinion, because as last time when we discussed it, we looked at the valuations and we saw that the price-earnings ratios were very, very undervalued, even within the category of frontier market indices. So Pakistan really deserves this, and I hope that it goes higher, so long as it is actively backed up by a strong main economy, like Main Street, as opposed to just our Wall Street. So not just financial capital, but we also want to see the signs in the mainstream economy, and there are good things happening on that front too. So I can only imagine that things should go up from here.
All right, wonderful. Before we go to macroeconomic indicators and the steps that the caretaker government has taken, I'd like to highlight the role of the SIFC, whether it be our caretaker Prime Minister who says reforms are being reduced in the investment policy through the SIFC, whether it be Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba, Minister for Finance, who has praised the role of the SIFC on more than one platforms. How important is the SIFC for Pakistan's economic stability and future?
What's absolutely important for Pakistan is to have an easy way of doing business. If this is done with the rest of the architecture, that's great. If it's done with SIFC, that's great. We honestly, as economists, care about the ends being prosperity in Pakistan. The means, well, if you go with one channel, then you have to wonder about the other channels and so on. But insofar as major projects are being highlighted, as far as negotiations and strong whole of government effort is being dedicated to it, I think it's a very good sign. And so we have to see these things. They are long-term projects generally. They are very large-scale projects in multiple sectors. So to evaluate their success will take time, of course. But if we have to take a short-term appraisal, then it seems like things are headed in the right direction.
I was looking through the different discourses that our Minister for Finance, Shamshad Akhtar Sahiba, has had. And whatever she has said seems very plausible and looks to me as if Pakistan has finally taken the right steps for its economic stability and to also come in line with all the demands of the international donor agencies like the World Bank, the AIIB, the ADB, or the IMF. Let's talk about the fiscal deficit and monetary stability. Do you feel Pakistan is going through a period where we are seeing the dividends of those?
Yes, absolutely. So there was a period where there was too much global instability and global economic turbulence, which made it difficult for countries such as Pakistan to know what the next even quarter would look like. Now that impacted us in terms of our planning, and it also put a lot of pressure on the monetary side. Inflation has been very high, and in that regard we raised interest rates very high, even by world standards, and our fiscal deficit was still very large because expenditures were very significant and collections and revenue was not adequate. So that period now seems to be gradually easing off, and it's a good thing because it's not just in Pakistan but around the world you're starting to see positive signs. And it's interesting that in other countries such as the United States, it almost seems like the central bank, the US Federal Reserve, is looking for a chance to raise it even more, almost as if to punish the people there. Now it's not just that they're going to, if they do that, punish their own people, but the effects will also be felt here. So we are part of a larger system in the world, so we are doing the right things. Now it's up to the rest of the world to also do the right things.
All right, let's come to the IMF and Pakistan. Shamshad Akhtar Sahib has said the delivery of loans as far as IMF has been mixed in the past. She says and highlights the non-political processing and delivery of the IMF conditionalities. How important is this also for Pakistan's future as far as its economic stability is concerned?
Well, that's a very good question, because when we look at the track record of IMF programs, our finance minister caretaker is correct that not every program has reached its full fruition. That means that whenever we restart discussions with the IMF, there's always a bad taste because you didn't perform well in the last one. So if we make commitments, we have to pursue them through and then live with the consequences, which are hopefully good ones. So insofar as the current program is going, there was a recent review and it was satisfactory on all fronts. And part of that is the politics that the finance minister correctly addresses, because largely in democracies, when you have an election cycle, you have this urge to spend near the end of the cycle so that you gain votes. This is the political budget cycle theory, and it does apply to a country like ours. Whenever that happens and it coincides with an IMF program, the desire to spend more is still greater for the votes, and so we don't fall through with the program. When you have a caretaker system, these people are not in for the votes. They are in just to fulfill a gap until a full government comes. So they are not bound by that, and they can actually adhere to what the IMF requires, which is difficult. I mean, you can ask our salaried class, you can ask various sectors of the economy. It's not like things are easy for them yet, but if you have to take a bitter pill for economic recovery going forward and to be on the right trajectory and to have less temptations of the budget cycle in future election cycles, then you need to take these sorts of actions now.
All right. You talked about bitter pill. Let's talk of pills, bitter or otherwise, and the reforms that are extremely important or key for Pakistan to stabilize itself and move forward as far as its economy is concerned. Let's talk of the FBR, and Shamshad Akhtar has been highlighting the role of the FBR and what needs to be done. She talks about the restructuring and the transformation of the FBR, which she says is in process, with internal governance that needs to be rectified and a new division that will be created along with the revenue division in the FBR for tax policy design and revenue framework. She also says that FBR needs to concentrate on collections only, and the separation of customs from the FBR is also extremely paramount. How do you see these measures for the stability or maybe a better functioning of the FBR?
Yes, I think that these are the right sorts of measures, and they're honestly a long time coming, because it has appeared to me that for a long time we haven't really given the importance to the FBR that it deserved, because revenue collection is the key in the major equation of one of our major deficits, which is that revenue should exceed our expenditures. There's two ways to do that. Either you cut down expenditures, which is difficult politically, although it is also important and probably necessary, but also to look at revenue collection. Now, the immediate steps in crisis management have involved, for example, squeezing the salaried class. This is inherently unfair because these are people who anyways play by the rules, and it's people like you and me, and we should say it's unfair. But there are sectors of the economy that have been more difficult to tax, or there are sectors which are bound with the global economy. For example, you import more, so you get tax revenue on that, but then you also have to export, etc. So there's all moving parts moving together, which have been difficult for us. So what I'm saying to you is that the FBR's reforms now are mindful of its importance and these moving parts, and therefore I think it is a long time coming.
All right. Shamshad Akhtar has also pointed towards not only the end of this current $3 billion program with the IMF, but also a forthcoming EFF facility for which talks have already begun with the IMF. She talks about the stability, the macroeconomic stability, which she says is quite fragile. She says a blueprint will be given to the upcoming government. How important will it be for the upcoming government to A, continue with the same policies, B, take the Pakistan's fiscal policy, monetary policy and economic growth seriously?
What the caretaker government is doing is setting the ground for the next government, and I think they're doing a very good job in that. Now, does the future government adhere to that and build upon it? It is an open question, and I deep down believe that the IMF, although it's seeing the good signs, will remain skeptical. And that's because it has done business, or it has engaged with Pakistan for decades. So the promise of the next government to the people and to the IMF has to be that we are going to take a rational approach to the economy. We won't live beyond our means. We will try to get more equilibriums working within our system, and therefore we won't require you in the long run. But for now, we're taking program after program so that we can have the liftoff of the economy. That's how the next government should approach it. And we should still keep in mind things like the political budget cycle. These are realities. This is the way the system works. You will vote for the person who promises you and delivers the most freebies for you. These are problems that the IMF will also keep in mind, and we should also be mindful of these things.
One of the requirements of the IMF is to increase the tax net, to make more and more people enter the tax net so that Pakistan becomes a more tax-paying country. The tax to GDP ratio is 9%, and a lot of people say it needs to increase to 15%. One of the measures that is in the pipeline is digital invoicing architecture to be developed through wholesalers, retailers, a scheme, and tech-driven campaign, for which Shamshad Akhtar talks about an agreement that has been signed with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and this way the non-filers could be also reached across the board, and even if they are not filing their taxes, they could indirectly be filing them one way or the other. How important do you feel this measure could be in the long run for Pakistan's tax net?
Well, to be honest, I think it has extraordinary importance, because insofar as we need to tax people, we already have the tools, but they're sort of dispersed everywhere. And so what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and NADRA and all these other institutions have to do is reconcile the data, because we can, even though we are a large country, we do have the architecture to know who is doing what, when, where, and why. And we already do indirectly tax everybody, for example, on cigarettes or petrol or all these other things. So now if you have a proper direct taxation system, which is fair, it is neutral, it is efficient, it is practicable, then you have you will adhere more to the global standards, for example, the OECD standards of taxation. And efficiency is a big part of technology. Fairness is a political thing, but it would be important that, yes, you have to tell the non-filer that you need to get into the tax net, but the truth is that once you do join, we're not going to give you hell, because filers ultimately often do regret being part of that, since non-filers get away with so much. So all we have to do is bring a little bit less disparity.
Bridge that gap.
Bridge that gap, precisely.
All right. When you speak of bridging the gap, how can you bridge the trade gap in your point of view? What would be the measures, if I were to ask you as a political economist, that Pakistan needs to take on an urgent basis, on a short-term, or on a long-term basis?
The key things to do for boosting our exports now is to consider what our key industries are. How can their business be facilitated? What is the cost of energy to them? How stable is the energy? How easily can they procure the imports? And that ultimately matters at the short, medium, and long run. But there are some other factors. One is that if the global economy starts to gather pace, then you will have more demand for your exports. Similarly, if you do integrate into a global value chains at higher levels, you will earn more from what you do. Similarly, if you have a better system for keeping capital here and motivating people, both Pakistanis, overseas Pakistanis, and foreigners, to keep their capital here and protect it, then you will get more value out of the earnings that you have. So,
final question, small answer. Foreign Office spokesperson says at a weekly news briefing that Pakistan has made a formal request to join BRICS. How important is it for Pakistan to be part of BRICS as far as its economy or its economic stability is concerned?
The short answer is that it's a huge deal. It's a very big deal, because the BRICS is the future of the world economy. It's about half of the global GDP as it stands, and it's more than 80% of global GDP growth over the next 2 decades. So if you are not a part of this conversation, you are missing out, and you fit naturally in the profile with Russia and Brazil and India and China. So we as a community have to work towards rebalancing the world economy. It's best to do that as a team. The BRICS team.
All right, let's hope we become part of the BRICS team by next year. Thank you very much, Usman, to have joined us. That was Dr. Usman Chohan, leading political economist, talking to us about Pakistan's economic stability, recovery, and of course the desire to join the BRICS, for which a formal request has been made. Also the KSE 100 index that has crossed the 59,000 benchmark, and a lot of good things and reforms that are in the process as far as Pakistan's economy is concerned. Let's come to our last 2 stories. The first concerns a mysterious pneumonia outbreak that has come as far as China is concerned. First winter in China without strict COVID restrictions since the outbreak of the pandemic 3 years, and they counter or encounter this pneumonia-like disease. On the 13th of November, China's National Health Commission reported an increase in respiratory diseases. In a press conference on Sunday, clusters of undiagnosed pneumonia in children in northern China were reported, and of course the report says infections have proliferated in Beijing and the city of Liaoning in the country's northeast, which are about 800 kilometers apart. But how did it reach all this period? Is it related to COVID? Is it related to the effects of COVID? Maybe the decrease in immunity as far as the people in China is concerned. What else can we expect from the outbreak in China? Chinese authorities say there is a need to step up disease surveillance and strengthen the capacity of the health system. So we wish that China contains this outbreak of pneumonia and respiratory illness like it did COVID a couple of years back. Then we are going to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, the 8th martyrdom anniversary of Pakistan's first female fighter pilot, Maryam Mukhtar. This is being observed today. We also saw a television play that was made in her honor as well. Maryam Mukhtar, born on the 18th of May 1992 in Karachi, joining the Pakistan Air Force in 2011, completing her graduation in 2014. 24th of November 2015, she was on a routine training flight with her instructor Saqib Abbasi when her jet developed a fault and crashed at Kundiyan area in Bhakra near Mianwali. The government of Pakistan posthumously awarded and honored her with a Tamgha Basalat on the 23rd of March 2016. It is the valiant efforts of people, women like Maryam, which continue to emanate within the women of Pakistan, and she becomes a role model for all those who want to follow in her footsteps. We will and want to see more women becoming as strong and highlighting Pakistan on the global arena as Maryam Mukhtar did. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah on Monday with news story segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. It's the weekend. Have a great one, but stay safe. Allah Hafiz.